Do you like League? Do you like Vampire Survivors? Do you want to burn your eyeballs? Well, look no further because there's a new mode coming out for League of Legends called Swarm, and naturally, for this video, I no-lifed it. I unlocked all the playable champions, min-maxed some builds, and beat the extreme difficulty. So is it worth your time? Should you reinstall League of Legends just for this? This is a review, guide, and discussion over the new mode. Any further questions that you might have, feel free to check out my stream, as when this video goes live, I'll be playing some more Swarm. Now, we all love to play video games because they are fun, fast-paced, and great time killers to stimulate our ADHD brains, but what isn't very fun is working, grinding through tutorials, and reading user manuals. And unfortunately, in the past, that was always the best way to learn something. But today, I have something very cool for you. This sponsor, Boot.dev, has the solution for you. Boot.dev is a game-like setting where you can learn the coding languages of Python and Go, and backend coding is an awesome career path where you can earn a six-figure salary in the United States. Boot.dev has made this process so much more interesting. It's a self-paced learning tool that plays like an RPG game. Students will earn XP, gain levels, earn achievements, and complete quests to show up on global leaderboards. The platform is designed to get you writing a ton of code because getting your hands on the keyboard in shipping projects is really the only true way to learn. And part of this process of making it more fun and interactive is through external means as well, as Boot.dev has an active Discord community helping you along the way if you ever get stuck. And here's the best part of it all. Their content is free to read and watch in guest mode. A paid membership unlocks the interactivity in the game that goes with it, but when you do get membership, they have a 30-day no questions asked refund policy and a free demo of every course and its interactive features. There has never been a better time or place to learn coding, and thanks to the awesome team over at Boot.dev, this is now possible. Click the link in the description down below and use my code to get 25% off your payment for Boot.dev. That's 25% off your first month or your first year, depending on the subscription that you choose. What is this mode? Well, if you've ever played a game like Vampire Survivors or Deep Rock Galactic Survivors, it's Riot's take on this concept. It's a bullet hell, like Realm of the Mad God or Just Shapes and Beats, mixed in with roguelike mechanics and persistent upgrades. Your first several rounds will be the most challenging, not just because you're new to the game and figuring it out, but the gold that you obtain through playing the mode will unlock new upgrades. For example, you don't even start with health regeneration, but once you earn enough gold, you can buy some. In addition, there's quite a few quests and objectives that will earn you new unlocks, upgrades, and champions. You absolutely do not start with the full suite of content to play with. You have to earn it. It's a smart system that rewards players for the grind and doing more than simply just one-tricking a champion the entire time, which adds some replayability. Speaking of replayability, there are 4 maps and a few nice gimmicks and mechanics, and this is one of the things that surprised me the most. You move with WASD, which for League of Legends I know is completely weird, but it works out alright. You have 2 abilities per champion, 1 basic ability on E, and your ultimate is on R, and the objective is simple: survive for 15 minutes until the big boss spawns. As you go along, there will be mini-bosses, events, power-ups, and upgrades. The system of augments has been reused again here from TFT and Arena, and Riot has done an excellent job of continuously finding ways to reuse this code. The pop-ups for upgrades are pulled straight from their other modes. I think what adds some of the fun for me is that you get to use the new skins, because the new skins are some of the best in recent times. I mean, seriously, they're sick. After those initial rounds that are a little bit challenging, once you get some baseline levels and upgrades, it will become substantially easier. Even though it is a bullet hell, it's a lot less of that and more strategy, build understanding, teamwork, and grinding. Mechanics are important in any video game, especially one that does have you dodging like this, but it's nowhere near as hard as it seems. A large part of the learning curve is just understanding what to do and how to build out your champion. So let me help you with that. Here is a quick guide on how to play. Warehouse District is the first map, and there's a Yuumi in the middle that can help heal your team. It does have a cooldown, so you'll want to use it at the right time. All of the maps have boxes and crates that are scattered around that have additional gold, healing packs, and sometimes even explosive bombs that help wave clear. The Outskirts has a cannon that needs fuel cells to power up, so your healing is drastically reduced compared to the previous map, but you'll have a bit more firepower at your disposal. The Subterranean Lab has 2 frost cores that will crowd control the enemy after a short channel, but keep in mind these also have a cooldown. The idea is that you should be kiting in between the machines, and when things get overwhelming, you freeze the herd and clean them up. The Beachhead is the final map, and there's a friendly Misfortune ally that moves around. You can move with her as she acts as sort of a half a teammate, but she doesn't die though, and if you want to ignore her, you can. She will always roam around the western part of the map, but on the beach there's an automatic cannon that will help you clear. Some champions like Riven with all of her mobility will love to play on the eastern side and on the beach. On these maps, there are 3 types of major objectives that can spawn: Misfortune buffs, Yuumi quests, and Belveth trials. Misfortune's buffs are simple pickups that will massively help you out. It could be a huge shield, or Earth mode, or even invulnerability cars. These are clutch and can save your whole run. Yuumi quests are a bit more interesting. They will give you a task, and if you complete it, you'll get a choice of augments. But what makes it fascinating is that some of the time these augments are not purely positive. Some of the augments have no downside whatsoever, but most of them do require you to give something up in return for power, so you need to choose wisely when it comes to Yuumi quests. On some runs, I've actually ignored the Yuumi quest since it is a bit of a risk reward, but it's fun to go for. Finally, the Belveth trials are additional bosses and combat challenges, and these are a must if you want to win. You can choose to ignore them as some of them are hard, but completing Belveth challenges will reward you with the most golden experience in the whole game mode. You have 2 types of upgrades that you can make: stat upgrades and weapons. The way that the stat upgrades work is that you have slots, and once you pick one, that occupies a whole slot for the rest of the round. The same thing goes for the weapons. Some weapons that are amazing for Jinx and Yasuo are not going to be nearly as good for bruisers like Briar and Riven. Since you do have a limited number of slots, don't just take random weapons. These weapons and stats can be individually upgraded multiple times to a tier 5, so you can upgrade your maximum health to a tier 5, your ability haste up to a tier 5, along with the rest of the stats. However, the weapons can actually be evolved to a tier 6, so long as you have the correct stat bonus. The Ice Blast armor is able to evolve to a tier 6 if you've scaled any armor, but if your inventory is full of other stats, you won't be able to evolve it. This is a great time to then explain what each champion does and what kind of build you're looking for. I'll go through the champions individually, and then in the end, I'll rank them on a tier list based on my testing. For Jinx, your best build will be using stats like ability haste, damage, movement speed, projectiles, armor, and max health. Now you can choose to greed and not use any max health or armor, but the reason that I found it to be good for Jinx is because she is very squishy and has no defensive tools whatsoever like a shield. Also, the static sword weapon does evolve with max health, so the weapons that are good for her are things like Uwu Blaster, static sword, and the Bladeorang. On Jinx though, you can be a little bit more flexible. I've seen some Jinxes run defensive stuff just to survive, and Tibbers isn't bad either for all champions as he's just an additional unit and teammate helping regardless of what champion you're playing. Seraphine is all about projectiles, as her passive has a chance to multiply them, and you'll want to fully spec into this with projectile count, duration, ability haste, damage, movement speed, health regen, stuff like that. Take any weapon that has projectiles like the Bladeorang, Gatling Bunny Gun, and Lioness Lament. Lioness will probably be your best in slot because it evolves with haste. Seraphine is very strong because she has a lot of team utility with her huge shield and movement speed buff, and the amount of times that we were able to get out of a bad situation just because Seraphine was shield spamming is insane. Now Leona is by far the tankiest champion and takes basically no damage if you look at armor, health regeneration, ability haste, and duration. Pickup size is also not too bad on Leona because you're so tanky that you can run straight through the waves and collect gold and XP for your team. The high roll for Leona is Radiant Field, with Ice Blast armor being a close second. Tibbers is also decent too because his evolve is with duration, and the combination of duration and ability haste makes it so that Leona's shield is the most broken spell in the game. Alawi will spawn tentacles close by to where she is, and her passive gives healing based on how many tentacles are close. So for her playstyle, it's a little bit more stationary and is not so much about kiting. You want to control an area of the map. The main stats that you want are duration, haste, armor, max health, and damage, with the others being pretty flexible. I don't currently know if projectile count does increase the amount of tentacles. I tried it and it didn't seem to work, but if it ends up working correctly when the game goes live, then projectiles would also be quite good. Duration and haste are your most important stats on Alawi because you are the most ultimate reliant champion in the game, and the duration is what your tentacles scale with. Tibbers also evolves with duration, and Radiant Field evolves with max health, but you can substitute some tankiness for damage if you want. Briar is really fun to play in this mode. You have so much healing and you're constantly testing limits getting down to 1 HP, and then boom, you're healed to full. Briar really likes max health, haste, duration, health regen, damage, movement speed, stuff like that. The first thing that you'll want to upgrade is your basic weapon, as she has the strongest autos in the game and you'll be spamming E the entire time. Your ultimate is quite similar to the Summoner's Rift one. It's a mega powerful version of your self-taunt. Use the ultimate when you're low and you'll rocket back up to full HP. Yasuo is insane in this mode. He arguably has the best ultimate in the game as it has a very low cooldown and high utility. The wind wall can completely save your teammates and your runs, but he's not just useful because of the wind wall, he also has great mobility and top tier survivability. You want to look at crit chance, movement speed, damage, health regeneration, haste, and armor. Projectile count is also very good. Riven is all about staying mobile. You should never stop moving as this champion. Movement speed is your best stat and will scale your entire kit, followed by haste, max health, damage, crit chance, and armor. There will be other stats that work well for Riven, like health regen and area size also being good. Interestingly, Riven is the only champion that doesn't need to use the cursor because in order to deal damage, all you have to do is run into them with WASD. She is by far the fastest and most mobile champion in this mode, which is hilariously fun to mess around with. Aurora is League of Legends' newest champion and is quite unique in this mode as well, and I found her playstyle to be pretty enjoyable. Your main stat that you want is experience because this is what levels up your basic weapon as well as your passive. Every 8 levels you will gain some power through your spirits. The other stats that are good are haste, health regeneration, duration, and projectiles, but similar to Briar, Aurora can be built in a lot of different ways. Her gameplay pattern is about kiting back and forth through the same paths. The first part of your attack hexes the target, and the second part procs big damage. So you want to stay around your targets and hit them twice by kiting in circles and dodging all game with your stealth. Xayah is all about pickup radius, as her passive extends this by default and damages enemies whenever you pick up gold and XP. Her basic feathers will also be evolved by this. The other stats you like are haste, damage, crit chance, and movement speed. Unlike Jinx, I don't think you need to spec into defense as much since you do have a shield once you evolve your basic weapon. Now the game has 3 difficulty settings: story mode, hard, and extreme. The way that I went about determining a champion's power is that I beat the final map and the Aatrox boss with all 9 of the champions on the hard difficulty by myself. That was kind of my control. If I were to rank them on a tier list, I would say that Aurora is the weakest, followed by Seraphine, Jinx, and Xayah, and then Yasuo, Riven, Alawi, and Briar are all interchangeably S tier. I felt that they were all around the same power level. And then finally, Leona has to be Exodia tier. You'll notice though that I didn't rank anything below A tier. You see, there are no bad champs because the game is not hard. The only reason the beginning rounds are hard is just because you don't have your stat upgrades. After just a couple of rounds, you begin snowballing very hard, and the game loses almost all of its strategy and becomes more about scaling through the unlocks. You can reach a point after a couple hours of play where you can stat check the game. And you know what's unfortunate is that as of right now, there's no real way for them to make the game any harder. All that making this game more difficult would do is make it much more frustrating to play, as the amount of projectiles on the screen is way too much. This is where we reach my biggest criticism of the mode. It is a bullet hell that has no true mechanics because the visual clutter doesn't allow for it. When playing multiplayer, if you run a team of Seraphine and 2 Yasuos, even with just 3 players, you will reach a point where you can no longer see what is happening. So much of the footage in this video has been a little bit grainy because that's the only footage I could capture for the game. The visual clutter is so high that the game is nearly unplayable. Wait till I tell you that you could also add an Alawi to your 4-stack. So with the added in tentacles, it is completely GG for any gameplay because the entire screen will be a mess. Also, weapons like Tibbers and Radiant are entirely too big and visually busy. Now, before you get mad at me and type your comment, idiot YouTuber never heard of a bullet hell game complains that it's a bullet hell XD, listen up. I have no issue with these games, okay? I love Realm of the Mad God, and I beat many of the maps on JSAB on the hardcore difficulty. The problem here is that this Rek'Sai boss that we are fighting currently on the screen has one singular attack pattern and one move. So not only is the boss not that impressive, it doesn't really matter anyway if it was, because you cannot see or discern a single attack that it does. The movement and abilities that a boss does is almost entirely irrelevant, especially in multiplayer. The reason that the game is beatable is not because I am skilled or good, it's because Leona just doesn't take any damage. There is no skill, no dodging, and barely even a thought is going into the gameplay in beating extreme difficulty. My champion is just too OP. Imagine if the enemy actually did damage me. It would be entirely unfair because how am I supposed to see what's happening? The core combat system, as it stands, does not work because the visual clutter is far too much and the difficulty has to be artificial. This is where I need to clarify though that I don't think the game is bad, and I don't think the concept is completely broken. I played a round that was rather enjoyable. It was when I was playing solo as Aurora against the tier 2 difficulty map with the Briar boss. At this point in time, I was not a max level character yet, and it was fun to beat it. It took me several attempts to actually accomplish it, and because there was far less visual clutter, and because Briar I think is the most well thought out boss, it was fun to dodge and learn. In this instance, I could actually see what the boss is doing and what her moveset was, and I found it fascinating. Comparing that to the co-op runs on max level characters, the clutter removes all of the gameplay. And as I said, I think two of the bosses, Rek'Sai and Belveth, barely even do anything, comparatively to Briar and Aatrox, who are at least somewhat interesting. So what could be done about this? Is there an actual solution? First of all, I think we just need to reduce the amount of particles. Instead of shooting 6 particles that do 10 damage, how about we shoot 3 particles that do 20 damage? The values would come out to be the same, but let's just turn down the amount. In a game like Realm of the Mad God, you can turn down teammates' opacity, which massively reduces multiplayer clutter. If I am not personally playing the Yasuo, I don't gain a lot as a player from seeing my teammate Yasuo throw out 5 million tornadoes. Aside from just the visuals, it's still on PVE right now for a reason, and I have encountered a substantial amount of bugs, many of which are game-breaking. On Riven and Briar, there is a bug where you cannot upgrade your basic attack. Briar has a bug that destroys some of her inventory items and makes copies of them. Bosses and enemies can get creep blocked. You can't always level up in the menus, and you're supposed to be able to get 6 inventory slots for your stats, but as of right now, I could only get 5 to work, even after completing all of the quests. And one last thing, this isn't a bug, but because Riven doesn't have a cursor and she's supposed to never stop moving, she would greatly benefit from an auto run feature that you could toggle on and off. It's pretty tough on your hands to never stop inputting WASD, whereas all of the other champions can take a break sometimes. This game is far from a finished product. We know that given the fact that it's still on PVE, but even when it does go live, I feel that it will still have some big problems. To me, Swarm feels like 90% of the fun is just because it's mindless and slightly entertaining to play your champion. The other 10% comes from the strategy, the build, the augments, and fighting the enemies. It's brain off, fast, and visually stimulating. It's also casual friendly and fulfills a lot of the ADHD time killer parts of many popular mobile games. I know that there's a demographic of players out there who do not play Summoner's Rift anymore. They don't queue up for ranked because they don't want to get into arguments with random weirdos and internet keyboard warriors. They have quit the game because of the toxic community, and modes like Arena and ARAM are the things that keep them coming back. Arena is now better than ever, but it's because Riot didn't give up on it. Riot put in the time to fix it, with 3 different iterations of its launch. After the first run through, everyone gathered all of the feedback, made huge sweeping changes, and released it once again after working on it for a while. The idea of a League of Legends PvE mode Vampire Survivors Bullet Hell is a good idea. There is a potential legitimate video game here with the target audience of a PvE, casual, co-op, or solo challenge runner. Imagine if the game was balanced enough to the point where you could attempt to no-hit it or minimize damage. Or imagine if the enemies and bosses were a little bit more interesting and fleshed out, that way it would be cool and impressive to beat the extreme mode. What if you could reset your stats completely, that way you could play as a low-level character for challenge runs? Continuing on that train of thought, what if there were a hardcore or endurance mode where you have to defeat all of the maps in a row, or you go full roguelike or Realm of the Mad God where you get 1 life? You can upgrade as many of the stats as possible, but on death you lose everything. Players can put in hundreds of hours into Cuphead, JSAB, Elden Ring, because it's actually interesting to perfect it. But as it stands right now, the visuals and particle effects that have been turned up to the Planck temperature make that impossible. We need to turn it down to like a low boil, a simmer if you will. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below, and check out my Twitch stream where I'll be streaming more of this mode to discuss it further with you guys. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.